Well, our next speaker is a fellow who was born and raised in Boston. Imagine that. Right? He was actually born behind enemy lines. He graduated from Harvard. He told me one of his courses was conducted by a fellow named Kissinger, who was assisted by a fellow named Brzezinski. And there were a couple of other of those types. But he said I got an A in the course, even though I disagreed with them. He led the student council at Harvard. He helped to form the Young Americans for Freedom, which means he got friendly with William Buckley, and then he found out about William Buckley too. Right? He was appointed the head of the Office of Economic Opportunity, the poverty program in the Nixon administration. And he took the job so he could abolish it. In 1974, he founded the Conservative Caucus. Now, you all have a flyer that you've been given about repealing NAFTA. Notice that it's published in association with the Coalition to Block the North American Union, headquarters, Vienna, Virginia. That's his address. He's married, he's the father of 6, grandfather of 17. Ladies and gentlemen, Howard Phillips.
Thank you very much, Jack. Quick commercial before I begin. I publish a newsletter twice each month called the Issues and Strategy Bulletin, and there are some sample copies available following this dinner at the back of the hall, and I hope each of you will take one of those sample copies. Now, I have a whole pile of jokes, but Jack told them all. He was looking over my shoulder. I won't tell any others. He did a great job. Let's cut to the chase. My friends, the issue today is the same as it has been throughout all history. Shall man be allowed to govern himself or be ruled by a small elite? Thus wrote former President Thomas Jefferson in a letter to former President John Adams in 1813. Since its earliest days, the John Birch Society has been working to expose such elites and to challenge them. They operate in many venues, including those orchestrated by the Council on Foreign Relations and similar entities which relentlessly conspire against America's unique status as an independent constitutional republic. The elites of this era have succeeded on many fronts, creating unaccountable globalist bureaucracies to override or circumvent properly constituted instruments of our federal republic. These include the United Nations, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, the Asian Development Bank, the African Development Bank, the Inter-American Development Bank, NAFTA, and the World Trade Organization, to mention only some. The latest and most insidious scheme of these elites and their allies involves their attempt to create a so-called Security and Prosperity Partnership, SPP, morphing into a North American Union, NAU, in which these United States of ours would be made subordinate in a merger with Canada and Mexico. Your leader, Jack McManus, and I, along with others, have been working with determination and perseverance to expose, challenge, and defeat the dangerous elitist plan for a North American Union. Thomas Jefferson drafted our Declaration of Independence, which asserted principles completely foreign to those which are at the core of this globalist perfidy. The Declaration asserted that, quote, all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Civil government must, by our consent, be accountable to us so that we can be accountable to our Creator. This is the antithesis of the corrupt principles on which the New World Order elites premise their agenda. They reject the fact that our rights are a gift from God and that they cannot properly be alienated by politicians, judges, or bureaucrats. Our elite adversaries reject the notion that governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed, asserting rather that the governed are the servants of the governors. The very first sentence in the U.S. Constitution, following the preamble, in Article 1, Section 1, states that, quote, all legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States, which shall consist of a Senate and House of Representatives, unquote. Every word of this clause has meaning. All legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States. No other element of our federal republic than Congress may constitutionally exercise legislative powers, not federally funded nonprofit corporations, not regulatory agencies, not judges, not the Federal Reserve, not the civil service, not any international bureaucracy, and not any presidential executive order which is not legislatively authorized. None of these usurpations is properly accountable to the states and the people through the Congress, as Article 1, Section 1 requires. The words herein granted are very important because even the Congress, the principal branch of the federal government, can properly exercise only those powers which are granted, and those powers which are vested, a term which makes clear that such vested powers cannot rightly be surrendered, subordinated, or transferred. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution stipulates that, quote, the Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises, to pay the debts and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States. Listen carefully. Power, quote, to pay the debts and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States. Except for these purposes specified in Article 1, Section 8, Congress has no rightful authority to collect taxes, duties, imposts, or excises. Article 1, Section 8 says, quote, Congress shall have power to regulate commerce with foreign nations, but Congress has surrendered this power and this responsibility to such international entities as NAFTA and the World Trade Organization. Even as we gather here this evening, President Bush is mounting another push for so-called fast-track authority to once again strip Congress of its authority and responsibility to craft trade policies. Article 1, Section 8 authorizes Congress, quote, to coin money, regulate the value thereof in a foreign coin, and fix the standard of weights and measures. Congress, at the outset, regulated the value of money. 371 1/4 grams of silver is, by statute, still on the books, the content of a dollar. Constitutional money is by weight, whether minted domestically or provided via foreign coin. That's why Article 1, Section 8, in the same clause, gives Congress the power to fix the standard of weights and measures. The Spanish coin, pieces of 8, functioned as a dollar for much of our history. 2 bits was a $0.25. 4 bits was half a dollar. The Spanish dollar was divisible into 8 bits. Article 1, Section 8 gives Congress the power, quote, to constitute tribunals inferior to the Supreme Court. That which Congress establishes, it may also disestablish. All federal courts below the Supreme Court exist only at the sufferance of Congress. Congress, not the President, has power, quote, to provide for calling forth the militia to execute the laws of the nation, suppress insurrections, and repel invasions, unquote. Similarly, Article 1, Section 8 gives Congress power, quote, to provide for organizing, arming, and disciplining the militia, and for governing such part of them as may be employed in the service of the United States, reserving to the states, respectively, the appointment of the officers and the authority of training the militia according to the discipline prescribed by Congress. Today, some Republicans and most Democrats in Congress want to disregard the provision in Article 1, Section 8, which gives Congress power, quote, to exercise exclusive legislation in all cases whatsoever over such district as may become the seat of government of the United States. Now, the Nancy Pelosi's and the Tom Davises of the world want to treat D.C. as if it were a state, with rights of representation, at least in the House, equal to those exercised by each of the several states. Article 1, Section 8 also gives Congress the responsibility to, quote, exercise like authority over all places purchased by the consent of the legislature of the state in which the same shall be, for the erection of forts, magazines, arsenals, dockyards, and other needful buildings, unquote. Yes, it is possible for Congress to authorize the establishment and maintenance of defense facilities within the boundaries of the United States, but there is no federal authority for parks, monuments, or other uses of lands which are legitimately within the purview of the several states. The three branches of the federal government are separate but not equal. Our Article 1 legislative branch is superior to our Article 2 executive branch and to our Article 3 judicial branch. According to Article 2, the President shall have power, by and with the advice and consent of the Senate, to make treaties, provided 2/3 of the senators present concur. Article 6 of the Constitution says, quote, the Constitution and the laws of the United States, which shall be made in pursuance thereof, and all treaties made or which shall be made under the authority of the United States, shall be the supreme law of the land, and the judges in every state shall be bound thereby, anything in the Constitution or laws of any state to the contrary notwithstanding. Some people argue that Article 6 of the Constitution should be interpreted to mean that ratified treaties, when in conflict with the Constitution, take precedence. But does it make sense that a treaty once ratified supersedes conflicting provisions of the U.S. Constitution? That is an absurd notion. Our founding fathers were not stupid. They established difficult procedures to amend the Constitution, including as one procedure a requirement that 2/3 of both houses of Congress may propose amendments, and that such amendments are to take effect only upon ratification by the legislatures of 3/4 of the several states. Did the framers intend that the Constitution could be amended in consequence of a treaty signed by the President and ratified by 2/3 of the U.S. Senate with no participation by the House and no required ratification by 3/4 of the several states? Of course not. Yet there are those today who argue that treaties supersede the Constitution. Article 3, Section 1 of the Constitution makes clear that, quote, the judicial power of the United States shall be vested in one Supreme Court and in such inferior courts as the Congress may from time to time ordain and establish. Over the years, the size of the Supreme Court has varied, as may be directed by statute. And as previously indicated, inferior courts ordained and established by the Congress may be unordained and disestablished. Quote, the judges both of the Supreme and inferior courts shall hold their offices during good behavior, Article 3 stipulates. Listen carefully, my friends. There are constitutional scholars who believe, as do I, that good behavior, quote unquote, is properly defined as fidelity to the Constitution. And moreover, that if a judge is unfaithful to the Constitution, he can be removed by the solitary act of the President or by a majority vote of both houses of Congress. Impeachment is not required as a punishment for constitutional infidelity by a judge. Of great significance with respect to the so-called High Court, Article 3 says, quote, "The Supreme Court shall have appellate jurisdiction both as to law and fact, with such exceptions and under such regulations as the Congress shall make," unquote. We do not need a constitutional amendment to prohibit abortion, to ban sodomy, to protect private property, or to reject quotas. Congress has the authority and, in my view, the duty to withhold jurisdiction from the Supreme Court in matters such as these. Article 4, Section 4 says, quote, "The United States shall guarantee to every state in this union a republican form of government and shall protect each of them against invasion," unquote. Why has Congress not acted decisively to end the invasion of its constituent states by illegal aliens? It is long past time for Congress to act. It also needs to be emphasized that the Constitution of the United States is a Christian document. This is made clear inter alia by its recognition of the Sabbath as a day which does not count against the deadlines imposed on the President to exercise his veto authority. Article 1, Section 7 deals with vetoes. It says, quote, "If any bill shall not be returned by the President within 10 days, Sundays excepted, after it shall have been presented to him, the same shall be a law in like manner as if he had signed it, unless the Congress by their adjournment prevent its return, in which case it shall not be a law." Similarly, Article 6 concludes with this language, quote, "Done in convention by the unanimous consent of the states present, the 17th day of September, in the year of our Lord, 1787, and of the independence of the United States of America, the 12th. In yet another glaring example of a disregard of the Constitution, even some of the most crucial elements of our Bill of Rights have been set aside by our Congresses, our presidents, and our courts. Amendment 1 says, quote, "Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press," unquote. Those who would remove the 10 Commandments from public places are acting in violation of the protections asserted in the First Amendment. Those who support restrictions on political participation, such as those incorporated in the Federal Election Law Amendments of 1974 and the McCain-Feingold Act, are, by their acts of omission and commission, putting their political prejudices above our Bill of Rights guarantees. Any and all, underline all, gun control laws passed by Congress violate the Second Amendment, which makes clear that the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. The Patriot Act violates the Fourth Amendment, which says, quote, "The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated," unquote. The 10th Amendment, which punctuates the first 10 amendments constituting the Bill of Rights, says, quote, "The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people," unquote. The 10th Amendment is violated almost every day that Congress is in session. The 14th Amendment, which was not properly ratified and which has improperly been treated as part of the Constitution, says, quote, "All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside." This has been interpreted to confer birthright citizenship and also to make one a citizen of his home state secondarily in a manner subordinate to and apart from his citizenship in the United States. I could spend the whole evening talking about the 16th Amendment, its fraudulent ratification, and its comprehensive misinterpretation. Let me simply say we need to set aside the 16th Amendment, abolish the IRS, and eliminate the income tax. I am confident that everyone here would agree with me that 1913 was a very bad year for our constitutional republic. The establishment of the Federal Reserve, which taxes us by inflating the money supply and diminishing the value of our earnings and our savings, the attachment to the Constitution of the 16th Amendment, and ratification of the 17th Amendment, which causes our U.S. senators to be chosen not by the legislatures of the states, but by so-called popular vote, a fact which has greatly enhanced the power of big media and big money. Because of the 17th Amendment, we have a situation in which a significant plurality of the members of the U.S. Senate are either millionaires themselves or deeply burdened by obligations to millionaires in the media, to multinational corporations, and to other elements of concentrated financial power, instead of to the states and the citizens to whom they ought be accountable. Since the creation of the Fed in 1913, the purchasing power of the dollar has declined to the point where in the year 2001, the last year for which these figures are available, it was worth nearly 4 cents compared to the 1913 dollars, from 100 cents to 4 cents from 1913 to 2001. My mother would always say to me, "Oh, Howard, the price of bread is getting so expensive." And I said, "Mom, the bread doesn't cost more, the dollar buys less." Thus far, I have shared with you a great deal of bad news. I need to seek your pardon for this because as members of the John Birch Society, you are used to hearing and understanding the bad news, even as because of such excellent publications as the New American, Review of the News, and American Opinion, you have been continually reminded of what our founding fathers had in mind and what the real history of the United States was, even though that history is currently ignored and obfuscated in the government schools, which are unconstitutionally funded by the federal government. Today, under budgets proposed by President Bush and approved by the Congress, $2.8 trillion per year are being expended from the federal treasury, all but about $600 billion for activities which are unconstitutionally beyond the delegated enumerated functions which the Constitution authorizes. This compares with outlays of $1.9 trillion in 2001, the first year of Bush II. The good news is that all of this can be turned around if we can get a president and a strong minority in Congress to offer a grand bargain to the American people, which in summary would end all obligations to pay income taxes to the federal government in return for the election of members of the U.S. House and Senate who pledged to oppose unconstitutional expenditures, even to the point of sustaining any and all vetoes of such improper expenditures. Here is one way in which such a grand bargain could be brought about. A constitutionally committed president could be elected in 2008 on the basis of a platform setting forth just such a grand bargain as I have described, a trade-off between abolition of individual tax obligations and abolition of unconstitutional expenditures. Upon taking office on January 20, 2009, this constitutionally committed president would propose a constitutional budget of about $600 billion, primarily for national defense, not the defense of other countries, but the defense of the United States of America. Commitments under the Social Security and Medicare programs would be honored in the context of a buyout, subsidized by the federal government's sale to the states or to the private sector lands and properties which it now unconstitutionally owns, operates, occupies, or oversees. Most likely, the Congress elected in 2008 would have spending ideas different from those of a constitutionally committed president, and would in all likelihood override in 2009 his vetoes of the unconstitutional outlays. It would then be up to the president to go to the American people and say that in 2010 he would support only candidates for the U.S. House and U.S. Senate who publicly commit themselves to sustain any and all of his vetoes of unconstitutional expenditures. I will support such candidates, would say the president, regardless of their party label. If you, the people, join with me in supporting such candidates, and they honor their pledges to sustain my vetoes, it will become financially possible to liberate you from the payment of income taxes. In order to have his vetoes sustained in the 112th Congress coming to power in 2011, it would not be necessary to have 2/3 of those elected to support his vetoes, or even a majority of those elected in 2010. 1/3 plus one of the members in one House, either 146 members of the House of Representatives or 34 members of the U.S. Senate, should they vote to sustain his vetoes, would be enough to cut off all of the expenditures which that constitutionally committed president deemed to be unconstitutional. As part of this grand bargain with the American people, Congress would be required to abolish the IRS code and eliminate all purported obligations for payment of income taxes. If Congress failed to act, the president could then, as chief executive, withhold funding for the IRS and terminate tax collections. In cases where the president's vetoes were not sustained, he could then use the power of impoundment, a power exercised by nearly every president, beginning with George Washington until the days of Richard Nixon. And he stopped using it because of me and the criticism under which I was coming as I tried to close down the Great Society. In this manner, the federal government would no longer fund Planned Parenthood or Gay Men's Health Crisis or the public broadcasting system or the National Endowment for the Arts or the Department of Education or foreign aid or the United Nations or any other unconstitutional appropriation, program, or entity. One of our speakers this afternoon spoke about the role of the Ford Foundation in funding MALDEF, Mexican American Legal Defense and Education Fund, and funding the National Council of Erraza. But what is not generally known, you know it if you read my newsletter, is that many millions of dollars have come from your taxes via the federal treasury to subsidize these and other radical organizations. When I was trying to close down the Great Society, I saw legal services lawyers pushing Athlon, pushing voting rights for illegal aliens in California and in some other places. These things aren't new, and they've gotten worse with every president. They were terrible under Johnson, they got worse under Nixon, worse under Ford, worse under Carter, yes, worse under Reagan, worse under Bush 1, worse under Clinton, and worse under Bush 2. You know, one of the reasons Bill Clinton became president was that Jimmy Carter named Hillary Rodham to head the Federal Legal Services Corporation, a nationwide network of 25,000 left-wing legal activists who were the nucleus of Bill Clinton's presidential campaign. A half a dozen of them became members of his cabinet when he became president, veterans of the War on Poverty. There is more I could say about the termination of the federal government's role in welfare and other so-called entitlement programs, but my time is limited. Let me conclude, and by the way, what does it mean when a politician says in conclusion? Absolutely nothing. But let me give it a try. Let me conclude by emphasizing that the two key principles which undergird our American Republic are the principles of sovereignty and accountability. The sovereignty of God and the ability of you and me and every one of our fellow citizens to hold the federal government accountable to us and to the states in which we reside. It is in fulfillment of these core principles that you and your colleagues in the John Birch Society have been working for these several decades, and for which I also have been working through the Conservative Caucus and other related venues. Constitutional conservatives must stop contenting ourselves with the idea that our task is to lose as slowly as possible. The only battles we lose are the ones which we fail to fight. Let us have a vision of victory. Let us strive tirelessly to make that vision a reality, and by God's grace, may we be privileged to play the decisive part in achieving the restoration of these United States of America as an independent constitutional republic. Let us pray that God will choose to use us, and that you and each of us will be blessed for our faithful participation in His cause. May God guide our steps and continue to bless our beloved country as our remnant takes the lead in rejecting the anti-Christian culture which is a stench in the nostrils of God. As George Washington said at a critical moment in the deliberations over the U.S. Constitution, if to please the people we offer what we ourselves disbelieve, how may we then afterward defend our work? Our task is to raise a standard to which the wise and honest may repair, recognizing that the event is in the hands of God. Thank you very much. It's in our hands too.